And it's not because you failed or you didn't particularly like the direction that you were going in. It's because you had this idea that you could revolutionize the medical industry and change how blood samples are currently being taken. And imagine that you got this brilliant idea after taking just one class of microbiology. Most of us wouldn't do that, right? Well, in 2003, Elizabeth Holmes did just that, but it didn't quite work out the way that she planned it to. Today I'm going to dive into the details of the rise and fall of Elizabeth Holmes' multi-billion-dollar company, Theranos, and how it was based off of technology that didn't even exist. I don't know about you guys, but I love crime podcasts, so when I heard about one that was based off of a college dropout scam, I decided to research some more. With my interest in the medical field, I really dove into it, and this particularly pertains to us in general because we are the front runners of most scams as college students. Companies target us just because we're just getting out into the world. We don't have that much experience into the world. And so that makes us the main target for scandals like this. So this means that we need to be more careful when trying new technology, especially when it involves our health, like in this case, Theranos' device. To better understand Theranos and its founder, Elizabeth Holmes, I'm going to describe how the company started, the lies and manipulations that were used, and how it all collapsed. I'll start with how Elizabeth Holmes founded Theranos. The rise of Theranos began on the back of Stanford dropout Elizabeth Holmes, who believed she could alter the way blood tests were drawn and run. According to a 2018 journal by Claire Fiala titled The Meteoric Rise and Fall of Theranos, Lessons Learned for Diagnostic Industries, the biotechnology company Theranos was founded by then 19-year-old Stanford dropout Elizabeth Holmes in 2003 with the promise to revolutionize blood testing and diagnostics. In his book on Theranos, John Carreyrou, who initially first broke the story of the Theranos scandal and all of the lies that came with it, he states that Elizabeth Holmes used a 26-page document to recruit investors on an adhesive patch that would draw blood painlessly through the skin using microneedles. The device would use a minuscule amount of blood collected by a finger prick instead of the traditional venipuncture. So this means that instead of using the traditional needle and test tube way to draw blood, it would be a device that pinpricked the blood, kind of like the devices that diabetics use. Elizabeth Holmes gained her momentum needed to roll out this device through her bringing in large investors. Claire Fiala states that these investors included former U.S. cabinet secretaries, senators, and military figures. Holmes was able to bring in all of these investors by her expert public speaking skills, and many were interested in how young she was. It's not normally that you see this large person in front of a corporation only at 19 years old. Claire Fiala records that there was images of Elizabeth with her new technology plastered on media outlets, and she was also hailed as the next Steve Jobs. Taking in with that, she decided that she would roll with that idea of being the next Steve Jobs, and she even started wearing the black turtlenecks and got like a deeper voice too, which people were trying to say that that just made her more intriguing and brought in way more investors as well. In 2014, Elizabeth Holmes had acquired $900 billion in funding. Although many were intrigued by the prospect of this new technology, the results weren't there. According to Alan Lindhoff, the scientist that attended the AACC meeting where Elizabeth Holmes spoke, it was pointed out that there was still no independent verification of the clinical data that Theranos was releasing. Elizabeth Holmes kept a tight ship, and she didn't release most of the results that Theranos was getting on the device. Meanwhile, she kept pushing the device, and she would speak at public events about how well it's working when we all know that it wasn't actually working. So, believing her, patients decided to try the device at Walgreens Wellness Centers. And in a 2018 article by Ken Sweet, he described that patients were at risk of having their conditions misdiagnosed or ignored. And this was further drove home in the medical journal by Dr. John Ioannidis, who writes that patients receiving incorrect test results were at risk of not having the full capabilities of getting what they needed. To come full circle, there were whistleblowers within the company that agreed with other spheres. In Claire Fial's article, she reports that whistleblowing employees reported that most tests that the Theranos did process were inaccurate or performed on commercially available machines using normal levels of blood. So this means that basically they weren't using the technology and were instead reverting back to the basic needle and test tube ways, or if they were using the technology, it wasn't actually properly working. So this caught up to Elizabeth Holmes, and it all came crashing down in one fell swoop, as Theranos and Holmes were brought up to criminal charges. Ken Sweet reported that in 2016, Elizabeth Holmes had to forfeit control over Theranos, and Claire Fialis reported that in addition, Theranos laid off 40% of its staff and officially closed its laboratories. Ken Sweet included that Elizabeth Holmes had to pay $500,000 to settle charges that she committed fraud. That $900 billion company that I cited earlier was now brought to nothing. Elizabeth Holmes is barred from serving as an officer or director of a public corporation for 10 years. Throughout it all, Theranos did not admit or deny any wrongdoings, meaning that the investors and the patients affected by this inaccurate technology didn't receive the compensation for their troubles. In summary, Theranos was founded on the hopeful wish of Elizabeth Holmes, and the negative impact is just now being brought to light after decades of lies. Elizabeth Holmes started Theranos at 19 after dropping out of Stanford. With the help of the lies, she became a rising sensation in the medical industry, but it all came crashing down when the lies came to light. As Claire Fialis concludes in her article, technologies that don't work are bound to fail, regardless of the marketing strategies. And Elizabeth Holmes is just another example of that.